it is feeling the pressure with over 1 million casualties. It's feeling the pressure in its economy, and you can see the signs of that now. But it's easing forward in eastern Ukraine at an enormous cost in people and equipment, and it would take about another 50 years at the current rate to take the whole of Ukraine.
So let's turn now to General Sir Richard Barrons, who was one of the he was the former Standing Joint Forces Commander, a Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff and a co-author of the 2025 Strategic Defence Review. Hello to you.
Yeah, good morning.
What's your view, given the government's overall spending plans? Are we on course to fulfil what you felt was necessary in that Strategic Defence Review?
So we're clearly not on course to deliver the defence review that was only announced in June. Some of that's not new. It was always the case the government didn't want to put any more money into defence this year and next year. So the MOD and the armed forces knew that the next 2 years were going to be really hard, and they are proving even harder. And that's before you think about perhaps getting ready for some sort of deployment or other support to Ukraine. But the bigger issue is the defence plan runs over 10 years. Defence has been trying to translate the defence review into a detailed plan, which it must do since June. It's still not been able to get that plan to add up yet. And my sense is if defence costs about £700 billion over 10 years, roughly, they are about 30 billion out. In other words, the SDR recommendations, which the government committed to, need another 30 billion over 10 years if they are going to be enacted. And if that money isn't forthcoming, then they'll have to have a reduction of the defence review recommendations. You can't live in a gap of that size.
And in the meantime, next couple of years, does that mean there are going to be further cuts in our military capability?
So the financial situation over the next 2 years means that a lot of good stuff still goes on. So submarines are being made, aircraft are being bought, ships are being built, and that kind of thing. But where the money is really short is in things like training and other forms of activity and the maintenance of equipment and the maintenance of infrastructure. And if you look around the inside of the armed forces today, it feels pretty threadbare because there just isn't the cash to do things even reasonably well in some cases.
And what does that mean for what, in realistic terms, Britain could contribute to some kind of stability force in Ukraine?
So I think the problem comes in different levels. So the people exist to send, for example, a brigade to Ukraine, and I think that's probably the currency we're talking about in the land environment, and substantial help from the Air Force and the Navy. The people are there. The equipment is there. What's missing is the support to that. So they need to train before they go. That costs money. They'll need more ammunition. They'll almost certainly need to buy more stuff to equip, say, a brigade that goes into the field, because when it goes into the field in harm's way, it needs more stuff. So there's a bill coming. So I don't think there's any doubt about the ability to do something very useful, nor do I think there's any doubt at all that it will have to be done. Getting ready feels a bit threadbare. But the real issue, and Grant Shapps raised this, is if the UK makes a commitment to Ukraine, and let's say it's a brigade on the ground as part of deterring Russia from starting again, then you can't say, well, we're only going to send it for a year, because Russia will say, well, we've got a year off. We'll call this half time, and then they'll go and maybe we can start again. You'll have to stay until Ukraine can look after itself and Russia has decided definitively not to try and attack again. So that's a condition-based exit. And that feels to me more likely to be a number of years than a number of months. And that'll be expensive.
You say you think it's likely we will end up deploying some British forces in Ukraine. What is your current assessment of where the Ukraine-Russia conflict is heading?
So I think the big handfuls of this conflict are now pretty clear. The first thing, Russia currently believes that it's winning. So it's not minded to stop. It is feeling the pressure with over 1 million casualties. It's feeling the pressure in its economy, and you can see the signs of that now. But it's easing forward in eastern Ukraine at an enormous cost in people and equipment, and it would take about another 50 years at the current rate to take the whole of Ukraine. So So Russia doesn't think it needs to stop, but it's only winning very slowly and at huge cost. But it's not minded to stop. And Ukraine knows perfectly well it will never create the armed forces that are big enough, good enough, robust enough to think of throwing Russia out of Ukraine. And they know that Europe isn't going to come and do that for them. But what Ukraine can do is make the cost of the Russian occupation ever higher. So more casualties, more losses in equipment, more cost to the Russian economy. But this is a very positional war now. And what it feels like eventually, both sides will come to the conclusion that there is nothing to be gained from more fighting. And they'll come to sort of very disagreeable settlement. And it's that settlement that the UK and the coalition are willing will have to make sure sticks by providing genuine deterrent capability to make sure Russia doesn't start again.
Is it feasible to do what was proposed in the original Russian-American plan of making a commitment to rule out NATO membership, to reduce an army? I mean, surely that kind of restriction is inappropriate to any sort of deal which maintains Ukraine as an independent nation.
So I think what you've just described are the Russian objectives in a negotiation, or indeed an objective that they have from this war overall. And we need to keep reminding ourselves, how did we end up in a place where Europe, with an economy 12 times the size of Russia, before you factor in the United States, somehow feels that it's in a defensive crouch in its relationship with Russia, which is aggressive and mobilized and far more warlike. So we need to be in a place where Russia understands it's not in its own interest to contemplate trying to put the arm on Europe in this way. And that means it is for Ukraine and Europe to decide which collective security arrangement Ukraine joins and what sizes its armed forces are. So we need to reset the strategic balance, or we'll have a poor outcome in Ukraine. And then that will very likely lead to Russia probing Europe elsewhere, perhaps in the Baltics or in the Nordics or in Eastern Europe. And that's a catastrophe we need to avoid, and it is within our gift to avoid it.
General Sir Richard Barrons, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much indeed.